So, yeah, thank you very much for joining us on this bitter winter's day. So this is we're going to address a perennial problem. I've been working in and around the advertising industry for more than 20 years, and ever since I joined, people have been agonizing over this question of how should agencies charge for what they do. There seems to be something about charging for creativity that makes it very hard to solve for that problem. Nevertheless, after 20 years and more of failing to solve it, we're going to solve it in the next half an hour, or whatever it is. And we've got a fantastic panel of people to help us do that. So I'll just briefly introduce you. So this is Toby Drummond. We have Rob Connolly in the middle and Tracy Shirtliff from Virtue at the end. In fact, why don't each of you just say a little bit about who you are and what you do before we crack on?
Shall I start? Okay,
Yep.
So can you hear me? Yep, so my name's Toby. I've been working at Ogilvy now for about 15 years. I used to work on several accounts. One was Ford Automotive, worked with a bit of Unilever, Dove, but don't ever get me involved in creativity. I do all the operational side of things. And so I sort of moved into an EMA role of basically helping agencies improve their operational processes. And now I've taken that on further into looking at from a global side, looking at measurement, objective measurements of how to improve. And I do all the ISO 9000 sort of areas of improving the business. So I'm the most popular person in Ogilvy, as you can imagine.
But when you say you don't get involved in creativity, I mean, you are involved in creativity. I mean, presumably you could be doing what you're doing somewhere else.
I don't actually do the ads, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I measure the improvement of creativity, but I don't actually ever get involved in the creative process itself.
Okay, thank you, Toby. Rob, tell us a bit about what you do.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Connolly. I own a consultancy called the Business Model Company. The Business Model Company is here to develop new models for the marketing industry. So when I say the marketing industry, I mean brands and agencies. And our ethos and our goal in life is to ultimately bring agencies and brands together to develop win-win models, because that's what we think the solution and the sustainable solution is for the future.
Cool. Okay. Tracy.
I'm Tracy Shirtliff, and I'm the founder of a company called the Virtue Group, and we produce a tool called Scope, which is a pricing tool for agencies. I started my life working for very large brands, so I've worked for British Gas, Forte Hotels, and I ended my career in client side, working as the head of marketing for Royal Bank of Scotland. I've also launched my own agency and started my own software company, which produced a product called Traffic Live, which was very successful at running end-to-end processes for creative agencies.
So you've been busy. Okay, so let's just start by trying to define the problem. Just talk about the problem. Before we get into potential solutions, let's just talk around what the problem is and try and get a sense of let's walk around it and get a sense of the shape of it. Tracy, let me start with you. How would you define the problem that we're trying to solve, and why is it so hard to solve?
I think the size of the problem depends on who you talk to, and it's some people see it as a dichotomy, and some people see it as a continuum. So you can talk about how you price for creativity, you can talk about how you charge for the work that you do, and both of those things in themselves start an argument. So if you're talking to clients are typically interested on talking about how they can price for performance. So straight away there, the agency is talking about a price for creativity, and the client is talking about a price for performance. How is it done at the moment? It's done in all sorts of ways, and there's all sorts of different models that can be currently used. So typically, an agency is running on a person that gets a specific rate that works for a number of hours, and that can either be by a project basis or on a retainer basis. Right the way to the other end of the almost like a dichotomy, you could almost do a partnership with a brand based on a percentage of profits from a piece of creativity that you did. So the model is vast. Currently, I would say that at least 80% of agencies currently sit in the price per head charging model.
And that's been the same for how long?
Well, I think the model fundamentally changed when media was extracted from the creative process, because it used to be creativity used to be bundled up with the cost of media. This is many, many years ago. So subsequently, when media...
Many years ago, children.
Many years ago.
Before you were born.
Absolutely. Maybe somebody else can jump in on this question.
Yeah, sure, Toby.
I think the question?
Please. Well, question is, when did the current model of pricing per hour per head, assert itself, and why haven't there been any really seriously radical changes to it since, even though it seems everyone's dissatisfied with it?
I think the short answer to that, and for those who want to write down, there's a really good book called written by Michael Farmer. Oh, sorry, there's a very good book by Michael Farmer called Madison Avenue Manslaughter. I really recommend you guys read that. It does give a very good history of the issues that we faced in the ad agency. So since we went through and we lost, as Tracy said, the commission from the media, and in those days, we were almost doubling our profits every 7 years as media inflation went up. There's only TV, radio, and print, so went through. Then obviously when that went away, then we started coming into fee-based things around then introducing that in terms of pricing and costing. And I think from there's been a whole host then of different types of models that have come through. Yeah?
Okay. Well, yeah, but the second part of the question is, given that everyone doesn't really seem to be satisfied with the model that we've arrived at, why is it so hard to shift?
I think it's so hard to shift because fundamentally agencies run off time. That's our cost. It's like we'd say to a manufacturer of Ford, don't you consider putting your price of steel into a car, but people don't buy steel, they buy cars. So we manage off cost of time, and that then comes into rate as well, as Tracy said. But I think the main thing that we're missing, for me, is quality. What is the quality, and how do you value quality is the key issue that I think we're all forgetting. So everybody in this room can create a press ad. Many of you can go onto iMovie and create your own videos, but they're not quality. So we're missing the actual, what you buy is not the asset. You should be buying the creative idea within the asset. And I think over time that's been commoditized just back into a list of deliverables, and the creative product has been forgotten about. But I think the thing to me is the value is not in the asset, it's in the creative product.
Okay, so let's come back to that, because I think that'll come back when we talk about potential solutions. We'll kind of follow that route. Rob, you work literally for a company called the Business Model Company. So what business models have you seen that are potential alternatives to the way it's currently done? Are there any interesting ones out there, or does it have to be kind of created from scratch?
Well, first of all, I would just say, just to build on what's been said to date, the problem that we have today isn't one side, it's both sides. When we say sides, we mean agencies and brands. And both parties are in a stage of shock and anger at the moment. And I'm going to come to the answer to your question in a minute. The solution lies in coming together and actually realizing that there is a problem, we do need to meet in the middle. But to answer your question, there isn't one solution, or there aren't 10 solutions, because every brand and every agency is different. And the goals and the objectives and the talent and the locations are all different. So the solution lies in coming together and not necessarily adopting a model that's already been developed. But at core to that needs to be win-win. And when we talk about win-win,
it needs to be what, sorry?
Win-win.
Okay.
It's okay for an agency to want to make a margin, to make money. And we're in a world at the moment where our brands are reticent and don't want our agencies to make money, because if an agency makes money, they can hire talent, they can invest in technology, and they can ultimately deliver more value to their, whether it be creative value or whether it be efficiency value to their brands. But equally so, it's okay for a brand to ask for more value for the money that they're spending in marketing. And when we're talking about more value from them, we mean better work, and also efficiencies, whether they be money or whether they be time or whether they be something else. So to answer your question and come back as a loop, there is not one model that is out there that is the right solution. You have to get together with your partner, become proper partners, and develop the model together.
Okay. Okay, so Tracy, just thinking about it from the client side for a moment. Well, let's think about it from both sides. What's the difference between how the agency side and the client side tend to view? Where's the kind of tension in the worldviews here?
My personal opinion is that the tension sits between both sides because there's not a view of transparency. One doesn't trust the other. So fundamentally, the brand thinks that they're overpaying for the work that they're doing and they're not getting the returns that they should. The agency feels like the brand is underpaying for the work that they're doing and they're not getting the returns that they should. So I think there's the fundamental piece that kind of sits in the middle is that there's no win-win. Both sides feel like they're hard done by with the current arrangement. And the current arrangement, predominantly in FTEs, makes agencies feel safe because if they've got their people paid for, the largest cost to a creative business is their people. So the only thing that can really affect that is that they can't afford that cost. So FTEs and being paid out for a scope of work or a piece of work that lasts for the year is very comforting for the agency. For the client, they feel less convinced by that model. The argument from the agency is that they need, in order to retain the talent and to have the people, you have to commit for a year, you have to have a full scope of work for a year, because if it's a project-based type scenario, they couldn't get the talent that they needed. If it was done on a performance basis, then if they didn't perform, that would be too much risk to the agency. So there's a number of kind of push and pull facets that are taken into consideration. Fundamentally, my personal opinion is that I don't believe in the charging per resource and people for the thing that is produced is the right way of doing it. You don't walk into Boots and say, I'm looking at the back of a bottle of Dove and I can see that has certain ingredients in it and I know the proportion of those ingredients and I know how much those ingredients cost, so therefore I'm prepared to pay that cost for that product. No, we pay a price for that product. So personally, I believe that the agency should have more confidence around the price that they put on the things that they deliver, which I call their assets or their deliverables. That's my personal opinion. But, you know, there's a whole ranch of other options. So the reason that I think we're stuck with the incumbent solution is because it's safe currently for the agencies and around retaining the talent pool that they feel that they need.
I would just add to that what Tracy said. If an ad takes 100 hours to create, the agency gets paid for the 100 hours. But the model we have at the moment is, if the agency finds a way of doing it in 70 hours, they get paid for 70 hours, where they should be getting paid more for doing it quicker. And that's the argument to move away from time.
Yeah. That's very powerful. Okay,
But
Toby.
the flip side to that is, what if it takes 130 hours?
That's the problem I see, is that very seldomly does something take 100 hours. I mean, I've seen projects that have gone through, 25, 35 rounds of creative. I mean, I literally came down to a creative. When we were based in Canary Wharf, I came to Craig Parkman as a guy with his head in his hands. I said, "What's the matter with you?" He looked up and said, "You see that skyscraper over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "When I started this project, that was a hole in the ground." That is the problem, and that's the management of the scope as well as the pricing of the scope, and that's what we get, and that's what we always get stuck with. So I think Tracy makes a good point, and I think probably Rob and I are on the same line. I think the question is, what are we selling in terms of the quality? So for me, there are three fundamental steps in a creative, and they each have a fine deliverable. The creative brief is a deliverable. It comes with a fantastic, good proposition at the end of it. That brief could be taken and given somewhere else. There should be a value to that proposition. The creative concept is a deliverable. It's a great creative concept. It could be taken away and given to another agency. And then finally, the production value is the creative concept. We never see it priced that way. We see a roll-up of all that together in a TV commercial or a print ad or anything else. It's like going to a builder and saying, "Can I have a house?" "Well, yeah, 4-bedroom, I'm not quite sure, but just give me a price for a house." It doesn't work that way. You go and get an architect's drawing. There's a price for that. I go to interior designer. There's a price for that. I go to the builder. There's a price for that. And that's where I think it's not, the value with the pricing is how we sell our product. and it's become commoditized, and it hasn't been considered about what the true value is, which is the creative idea. And that has to be protected, to your point, for the clients as well as the agencies, because that is what we're selling. We're not selling a widget or an asset. And I feel that procurement in many cases, one minute they're dealing with looking at a widget, and they come into an ad agency and they try and treat us the same way. And we're a service-based creative industry, and it has to be recognised that the value is not in the deliverable, it's in the creative idea.
Okay. Go
I
on.
was just going to say, Tracy, I think this is a good opportunity for you to talk about what you do in more detail, because what you've brought to the market is a tool that ultimately eliminates that risk in some way and measure through the data that you use to build scopes.
And also, can I just supplement that by saying you would say it is the deliverable that agencies should be charging for? Is that right? Or are you just defining deliverable differently?
Careful, Tracy.
I believe that agencies should be charging for deliverables, the things that they produce, and there should be a cost based on that a charge out for that.
I'll say why that model's broken and why I don't think it's right. Let's say you come and do a campaign, and I come into a big idea. And I come to a big idea that then has TVs, print, radio, everything should spin off that. So you have to come with the idea first. You pay for that, and then the deliverable comes afterwards. So the actual deliverable, creative should be a deliverable in its own right.
Creative planning and strategy in my world is a deliverable.
Well, then in case we're aligned.
Research is a deliverable.
I
Measurement is a deliverable.
I see too many scopes of work where that is bundled in to just an overall deliverable, and that's where I think it's wrong, and it's split out.
Yeah, and as a former and still part-time planner, I'm very pleased to hear that planning is a deliverable. That means we can charge for it. Okay, so but the question is, if you're saying we need to get better at charging for the idea, how do you do that? How do you measure the value of an idea? You don't know how valuable that idea is going to be.
That's a very good point, and I think as an ex-planner, you would know, I would hope you would agree, that if you get to a great proposition, it will automatically drive great creative, and great creative is what basically the value comes into it. And I think that's what you're trying to get to. So for me, and that actually is driven from the client brief. I mean, I don't think the clients sometimes don't often recognise the importance of their business brief that helps drive that creative brief as well. And I think that's where the partnership is really important, to understand both those sides.
I think a learning that I brought to my clients recently is the power of a good brief. A brief that is really clear on what the goals and the objectives and the KPIs are. Because once you have a good brief, you know if you succeed or meet those KPIs, then whatever has happened in the middle has been a success.
Correct.
And that work, whether you call it creativity or great work, ads, whatever it may well be, it has worked if it has met those KPIs. So for me, the measurement of creativity starts with a good brief, and you measure what that brief wanted that work to do.
Planners for the win.
Yep.
Music to my ears. Okay, but yeah, as discussed, it just seems to get rolled in with everything else, and therefore charging for strategy again is sort of notoriously hard for agencies to manage. Why is that?
I think it's because people see it as a part of the bigger picture instead of a key deliverable, which I think is what Toby's talking about. And planning is often, certainly within the creative process, kind of the last thing that comes to the party. A number of times I've talked to creative agencies who don't feel that they can charge for that, which is just wrong, because it's an absolutely fundamental piece with understanding or cracking the idea, isn't it? It's the strategy behind where we get the creative piece from. So I fundamentally believe that planning and strategy is part of one of the deliverables.
It's interesting, like how you define deliverable, and I quite like that. I think the sort of definition you were reaching for there, which is that it's something that you could pass on, and somebody else could do something with it. Right. Okay. Is that how you would think about a deliverable, Rob? Like, what is a deliverable? Because if we're going to say we need to charge for deliverables, so we need
absolute alignment with everyone here. A deliverable is something that is developed and can be used, and that can be an email, that can be a conversation, that can be a workshop, that can be a strategy, that can be a banner, an ad, that can be a measurement report. They're all deliverables.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the solutions, including some of the ones that might be out there already.
Ian, can I just clear something up? I've heard it called deliverable. I've heard it called asset. I've heard it called value proposition. I've heard it called all sorts of things. I mean, maybe a great question here is: has anybody else heard it called anything else? Because output is another one. So, I mean, there's already a number of things that we're calling this, but I think what we're saying is that there is a value for something that a business is delivering for another business. Is there a better definition for that?
Not yet.
Yeah, in fact, let me, Rob, you might be well placed to answer this. Are there other comparable industries facing comparable problems? Like, are there other service industries where, you know, they're finding it hard to work out what exactly they're charging for and how to charge for the most valuable stuff they do? Yeah. It can't be just the advertising industry that has this.
Architecture, we have law. They're all based on time. Now, architecture more so has moved. It moves to a percentage of the budget for certain assets or deliverables, but the legal profession hasn't. They're falling well behind, and they're finding it hard to charge for the value that they bring to a client. Again, their model is the more we spend on it, the more money we make. And it should be the quicker we do it, the more money we make. Yeah. Or the better we do it, the more money we make.
I think to Rob's point, I think that's absolutely right, actually. And I don't think agencies have done themselves any favours by not actually educating our clients in the overall creative process. And I think because we haven't had to do that in the past, we're not trained in doing that, we don't think in that way. And I think, you know, with the likes, you know, of Tracy's tool, I think is really helpful. It actually breaks down all the individual components that actually gets you to that idea, which visualises that for the clients, which I think is really helpful. I think Rob's point about it has to be a partnership between the clients and agencies is also valuable. And I think through those coming together and an understanding of what it takes to get to good creative propositions and good creative, I think will instinctively help improve the value of the creative product, and then that will improve impact in the pricing.
And Rob, when you're talking to clients in particular, what do they see as the biggest sort of obfuscations or mystifications at the agency? What kind of annoys them about agency practice?
The lack of appetite to change.
Right. And our clients, I mean, I'm not always struck by clients having huge appetite for change, but do you think that's unfair? Are they more willing to change than agencies?
Well, when I work with a brand, the reason I'm working with that brand is that they have already identified the need for change.
Okay, yeah.
So
it's a self-selecting sample.
You know, that's 10% of the ecosystem that we live in. Right. So 90% of brands haven't quite got round to understanding they need to change.
Yeah.
But for the brands that do want to change, they get frustrated by their current or potential future partners, whether they want to change their model. But to Toby's point, it's quite difficult for an agency that's been going for 40 years to change. If they have been charging for time for 40 years, if they pay those people based on that model, it's hard for them to change. Yeah. So I think we have to, so they get frustrated with the change, but we have to change. We have to change it, and it's not just what is the commercial model, it's what are the ways of working, what are the capabilities that we have internally, how do we pay for those capabilities, how do we measure, what's aligned with our business goal and vision. So there's lots of things that need to come together to change, and that's why agencies are reticent to change, because it's quite a hard thing to do.
Yeah, but what will happen, Tracy? What will happen if agencies don't change? I mean, where will the clients' budgets go?
Is this where I paint the picture of Armageddon? Over time, there is more and more pressure against agency margins. I mean, maybe this is even a question to open up for Toby. We're seeing consolidation of agency brands. We saw kind of the advent of digital and various other kind of types of agencies springing up. Those then were their own success stories. They've then now consolidated again to this kind of groups of agencies. Agencies themselves are under pressure. You know, you just need to pick up a copy of Campaign or jump on Creativepool or any of the other kind of resources, and you know there are redundancies, there are teams that are merging and downsizing, and you know the model is absolutely currently under pressure.
I think there are a couple of factors actually, and I think if you go back in history when we were connected into media fees, agencies used to run their profitability at the agency level. You know, X million coming in, X million coming out, good healthy margin, no problem. Then media stopped, goes into fees. Things got a bit tighter. They started then having to manage profitability at the client levels, and that required timing and, you know, watching how much your contribution margin recoverability is on those ones. I think now, and this is where the agencies are really struggling, margins have got so much tighter now, we're now having to manage at the project level. And that is really quite difficult for agencies to do because it's just not in their mentality to do so. And that's why I think you're seeing, you know, where the digital agencies, actually, they've always managed projects, they're coming through, and that model is now coming more and more into the above-the-line agency side, which is just completely contrary to how they actually operate and work. So I think that's affecting margins that way. The other factor is, with the diversity now of the media channels that are out there, it doesn't make sense for agencies to keep all those skill sets in-house. So you actually see then an increase of freelancer costs coming in because you need to pull in, you know, resource to actually manage those, you know, those particular, you know, those types of resources. So that's another factor as Tracy's coming through. So you're now into a dilemma where you have a base of employees you need to basically recruit to service your clients, and then you have the other factor of actually having to bring in lots of things, and that's a cost value that often isn't passed on to the clients, and then it's left. And then I think the final factor of that is about the efficiencies which are related back to the clients, which are often not factored in. Some clients are very complex in their approval processes, hence you get around 20 rounds of creative. You know, is that factored in? And all those sorts of areas that way. So I think the collection of all that together, you're seeing a drive down of margin, quite significant in some areas. It's not been recognised, I think, from the client side, and that ultimately will affect quality. And then the quality, and then you then start seeing clients moving. One of the really worrying facts I saw in that book, Michael Farmer's book, was that clients now tend to be moving every 3 years. That's a frightening statistic to think about. The amount of, you know, risk you're going to find that agency. How can you really ever build a relationship and a proper trusting relationship with your client if you're going to move every 3 years? And that's, you know, much driven down to the profits and margins.
Yeah, so there's been quite a lot of buzz around a newish agency called Uncommon, who sort of founded by people from Grey. And one of their kind of principles is that they will partner with clients to create brands and then take it. They're not the first to do this, but I'm just using them as a kind of high-profile example of agencies doing. Rob, what's your kind of view on that kind of model? Do you think that's one potentially effective way for agencies to work
I'm not familiar with that particular example. When you say partner, do they then take a share of the growth?
Yeah, as I understand it, yeah, they'll take a stake in the success of that brand after having co-created it.
Again, I suppose I come back to my comment a few minutes ago. Every brand and every agency is different. So if that is the right solution for that agency and that brand, then yes. Is there higher risk in it? Of course. And is there higher reward? Of course. So it depends on the mindset and of the leadership of both brand and agency, whether they want to win big or take risk.
And I'm just trying to explore what the alternatives. Sure. What the
I think this is
are.
phenomenally interesting because this is putting your money where your mouth is, and I don't think that the agencies have had the confidence or the abilities to do that. And I'm not sure if I was running an agency whether I would either, because you have to rely on income in order to pay salaries and be responsible to the people that you employ. I admire them for starting out on that path, and if they're successful, I will be the first to herald them as successful. I think it's phenomenal, but I don't think that is a model for everybody. They've obviously also come out of a very successful business. They come normally out of the creative angle of those businesses and less out of the business. I'd love to be proved wrong. Toby, did you have something to add?
I think I'd agree. I think For me as an agency, I think there's just too many variables in that whole chain. You can come up with a fantastic creative idea and the product may not be very good. Yeah. You can come up with a fantastic creative idea and the salespeople aren't trained properly. I mean, there's just so many variables. I think it's a high-risk strategy, and I think we should keep to being paid for what we do, and what we do very well is the idea and the creative idea.
Yeah. Okay. But we haven't
But
really.
it's an idea.
It's an idea.
It's a great idea.
It is. Okay. So are we all agreed that ideally agencies would be charging for the creative idea primarily, rather than people and time? You're not sure? You're all
I think we should
wincing
be charging. We come full circle again. I think we should be charging for deliverables. That may or may not be the creative idea, because there's huge value in going back to a brand and saying, "Don't do any work this year."
Yeah.
And we should be paid properly for doing that.
But then how do you distinguish, whether it's a creative idea or whether it's a strategy, how do you distinguish between the quality of that deliverable? Or how do you assess the quality of that deliverable, and therefore how much to charge for it, if that's your criteria?
Again, comes back to the brief. If the brief is good, you should know whether you've met and achieved the goals of that brief, and that's what you should be measured against.
Okay. I think to answer that question, and I think I go back to what Rob said right at the beginning, which I fundamentally agree with, which is that's a partnership, right? If the creative, writing a brief, and the client believes that's the right brief for their business, that's a collaborative approach to saying, yes, we agree that's the right direction for our business, and we agree on that, and there's a deliverable cost for that. And the same with the creative. I think you can't suddenly put all that emphasis on the creative and say, oh, well, you came up with the idea, because so much often, against our will, the clients often change our creative or change our briefing because they don't know, they want to see more specification, actually kill the idea. So I think that has to be, a collaborative approach, and that comes down to trust, relationships over time.
Okay. Can I throw a curveball in here? I mean, your example of uncommon is the other side of is the dichotomy from where we are now. Hours, roles, and people, and an FTE basis versus we're coming up with an idea, we're going to partner with you, and you're going to get a percentage of your profits. So that either end of the it's dichotomy, either end of the continuum. So my personal opinion is that we need to move from where we are now, but we need to do it in a structured way that makes both parties feel comfortable and feel safe. So I believe that we need to charge per deliverables, but I think there needs to be, at the beginning of that, an underlying and pinning of kind of what those deliverables are made up of, and what parts of those, and how do you charge for those? Because the issue we're coming back to time and time again is trust. So if I said I want £1 million for my creative idea deliverable, and the client said, well, I think that's worth 100,000, we're too far apart. However, as an agency, I probably have an idea about what I feel that is worth as that deliverable, because I've done that before, I've made it up of something I've done over and over again. I come at this where Scope, we've produced a software product that is using big data from nearly 1,000 agencies, and we've defined a set of what we see as industry standard deliverables, which are made up of roles, hours, and rates. You don't need to follow those, however, it gives you a guide, because one of the biggest challenges is moving from this position that you have at the moment, is I'm now wanting to charge for the things that we're doing as opposed to the people, and that's a big step change in anybody's comfort zones. So trying to move along that continuum to kind of add a different view and a different value proposition.
Can you just tell us a bit more about how that works? So what's the data that you're using to?
So I think the skill is in any data, and in coming to this, what do you do if you've got data from nearly 1,000 agencies? It's a huge challenge, and to be honest, we had a couple of false starts at it, and it took us nearly 2 years to crack it. So this is using statistical data, modelling, AI, and what we had to do is we actually had to define, because each agency does something slightly differently.
Yeah.
So. And not one shape fits all. So what we had to do is take all the data that we had from these agencies, and we had to define it into what we called agency disciplines. So what am I producing? So am I producing a piece of content? Am I doing a piece of SEO? Am I doing a piece of PR? Am I doing a piece of advertising? Radio, TV, is it a booklet? Is it a brochure? So firstly, we need to identify the things that we're producing. And then you need to try and identify some consistencies in what it takes to produce those things. So if I'm going back to the cost that I have on my Dove bottle, how much would I charge for that based on the things that are inside it to begin with? So what is my cost of production? Then what I decide to charge on it is based on the skill set that I add to that over and above what it should cost me.
Okay. The trust issue that you raised seems really central, right? And it's hard to try, or it's difficult to build trust if your relationships are more short term, right? So I mean, so your point about clients moving more quickly seems to be fairly kind of fundamental, but I don't know quite how you address that.
I think it comes down to partnerships and trusts, and I think it comes down to, and I think that's where, if you don't understand the process and you haven't explained the process properly to, of how you get to these key deliverables, and you just come up with, I think that's going to cost us, 40,000, and so, well, how do you demonstrate that? And and I think in the past we found it very difficult to demonstrate that, and that's why I say I think the value, what I see with Tracy's tool, is it moves the conversation away from pricing and rates into all the components that are actually there to deliver it, and then you can have a better conversation with the client to say, well, which out of these components do you want me to take out then? Because each one of these components will drive or remove quality. And so I think the conversation is changed into, how do we do those things, and then why there's a value to each one of those components versus, let's just do 50,000 for this or whatever. Okay.
Yeah? I'd just add to that. I think there's two things to do with transparency.
Agreed.
And process. So when I talk about transparency, I have an example of a client that works with a brand. It's an agency that works with a brand. And they are using output pricing. And every month, the brand and the agency meet, and they talk about two things. They talk about the profitability of the agency based on those outputs. Did you make money out of those outputs? Yes or no? Why did you not? And if yes, why did you make? And the second one is creative. Was the output good enough? You might have made money, but was it also good enough? So did we win? Did we both win in that month? And that process of getting together and both understanding what the win is for each side, but also being empathetic to making that, putting in a process to make that actually happen is really important. That is okay. In addition to your partnership point, that's how you deliver it.
Okay, so we've got some consensus here that the existing model doesn't work so well. We need to get better agencies need to get better at charging for deliverables. That requires more trust between agency and client, and requires movement from both sides. But so we're just going to round off and sum up now. And you can each kind of say your final words. But I'm also going to ask you to answer a very simple question, which surely is very easy to answer, which is, if you were setting up an agency today, how would you charge?
Rob, or how would I charge? I think the first thing you do is you want to find clients who want to work with you. You want to find clients who who over time will trust you and everything else. And I think I would try to take them through what we actually do and what are those key deliverables, and actually try to get the client to understand that we're going to do a creative brief. I want to get paid for that. And the creative concept, like we said, and I think that's the standout ways. And I think then the second part of that then is actually the service that we give you for delivering those products, the market coordination, the trans creation, the ad apps, all those sorts of that ways is another type of deliverable. And you sort of break it down so people understand the process better and the value to each part of that process and why they're paying for it.
Okay.
I'll let you into a little secret. I'll tell you how I charge. Now, I am a consultancy, not an agency, but I charge based on the size of the budget or the size of the agency that I work with. So I take a percentage of that. And I put 50% is paid, irrelevant for outputs, but irrelevant of the performance of the new model. And I have 50% that gets put into performance. Okay. Now, that percentage, 100% of that percentage is a hell of a lot more than if I went in and just priced it on day rates for my consultants to sit and work with clients. But I tell you something, the clients that I work with are very happy to pay that big fee if they've transformed their business or their marketing department.
That's interesting. And how might that translate into for an agency?
I think I
Percentage of budget
Yeah,
that you're working on, or that is affected by the work that you will be producing.
and I agree. Hold on. I think I agree with Rob. I think there's a base mandate that you require, and you put that in place, which is there for servicing the client and offering that value. And then there's the other parts that you pull in, as and when you need them, and that's the price.
It's skin in the game for both parties.
Okay. Tracy.
It's an interesting model. There's if only. I mean, if I was to start an agency tomorrow, I think the challenge is to move away from something that it's a very busy market there. So I think it's understanding how you can have your value proposition that's slightly different from people and hours and resources. I love the idea of a piece of it being deliverable based and potentially a piece of it being a percentage based on performance. I think that's a nice mix. Yeah.
Okay, but you seemed quite sceptical about it.
Well, I think
Tell me why.
I think it's difficult. I think it relies on trust, and if you're starting out in a business, cash is king, and that's invariably why they go to covering their cost with a cost of people. That's why you charge by an hour as an FTE. It's easier to manage. So I think if you've been running for a number of years and you have a set of incumbent clients, I think it becomes easier. I'm challenging the status quo.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there are some agencies out there that do charge at cost and then have a larger performance element, and that's ultimately the same model as what I adopt for mine.
Okay.
It's what does it actually cost with no margin,
Yep.
Yeah.
and then everything else is upside.
Okay. All right. So I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for coming along and listening. We've really enjoyed it. There were no easy answers, clearly, but I think we've at least shed some light on the problem and pointed to a few ways out of it. So thanks very much to these guys.
Does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions?
I've been working in the creative business for more than 20 years, and I've struggled with this, especially in the UK, where everybody's so price sensitive about everything, and there's a lot of amazing talent, very young talent, who will work for nothing, so it's a bit of a race to the bottom. What does the panel think about an approach of bundling deliverables together, so that the client has one budget, and we as creative have one set of deliverables, but it's a much more broad costing where we also put a bit of contingency in there, and so does the client, and they're happy and we're happy. I'm not sure what the panel think about that.
I didn't quite hear the question.
I think bundling the deliverables together is this. I think it's the definition of deliverable. I think it's the key thing, right? And I think when you start seeing, as I have seen, scopes of work which says, I got a campaign, I want 3 TV commercials, 2 radio commercials, and listed that way, and here's. For me, that is then devaluing the creative and the planning process. So for me, I think the more we can break that out and say the deliverable is a planning brief, a creative concept, and a production, I think you get paid better for what you're doing, and there's a value for each of those key components.
Okay, we've got another question.
Hi, I've worked on the brand side for more than sort of 10 years. I love the idea of pricing by deliverable. It gives me lots of control in terms of understanding what exactly it is that you're going to do and how much it's going to cost. Are there many clients who are asking for deliverable-based pricing?
Better for Rob.
All my clients that I work with consider it as one of the options. Either they've heard of it before and want my point of view in it, or I've brought it to them as an option. So yes, and they all are very interested in it as one solution that moves them away from time-based pricing. It's the easiest one to transfer to. It's the next step along the line. Moving to a performance model is a big step for them. So whenever you do talk to them about it, it feels more comfortable to them. Because ultimately, the outputs, the deliverables are based on time. You've just bundled it into a product or a deliverable.
Gentleman, here's one.
Oh, got one more question.
Hi, thank you firstly for giving your knowledge today. We spoke a lot about how to set a clear brief with the client, working in partnership, so that you have a clear set of deliverables to deliver. How do you tackle rescoping a brief when the requests are made beyond what was the original creative brief? And then second part of that is that conversation impacted if you think that the creative idea has a lot of potential?
I think if I've understood your question correctly, I think there's three elements to scopes. I think there's the initial planning of a scope. I think that there's the pricing of the scope. I think there's then the management of the scope. And I think that agencies don't manage scopes as well as they could. So we've looked at the key KPIs that go through scopes, like rounds of planning rounds, research rounds, creative rounds, so there's something that way here. And I think where I haven't seen it done particularly well is actually agreeing up front with clients what the escalation is after 3 rounds of creative or 4 rounds of creative. That has to be a collaboration between the agency and the client, because all too often you just get told, just do it again. And then you start racing into the 20 hours, 20 rounds, that's what that way. So I think in the planning process and when you create your contract, I think it's really important to escalate those risks that protects the agency as well as the client. And that's where I think we don't manage that as well as we could. Sorry.
I think management of the scope or the FTEs is a fundamental challenge when you're talking about things changing over time. And I think that's one of the negatives to the current model of charging per people for people in hours. And I think that it's almost impossible in that current method to manage that process.
Great. I had one question as well. So as far as the pricing goes in general, how do you know when to make that leap from being a small agency to a middle-sized agency to a larger agency, and how can that reflect in what you charge?
Okay, you can't hear me. I think my hearing's better. Sorry. I think it goes back to Rob's point, actually. I think, if you look at all the different types of frameworks there are, there's project, there's fee, there's retainer, there's multiplier, all these in that way. I think it all comes down to what's best for you as the client, fitted to the agency. So if you're a big client, multi-market client, you probably would more hesitate towards going towards a fee-based thing, because you need a set number of people to manage all that coordination side of things. If you're a smaller client needing like projects or every now and then, you probably go to a project model. Does that help explain what you're trying to say?
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Sorry.
Was there any other questions?
Any other questions?
I agree completely with charging for deliverables per project for agency side. But what do you feel in terms of, could that create a view for clients to be seeing more ways in which they can cut costs towards each project? If they're cutting costs for budget reasons, or maybe even pushing design or creative thinking side within in-house in the client side?
So the question was that you see the value in deliverable-based pricing or asset-based pricing, output-based pricing, but you're concerned that the clients will find a hole in the way to make that.
Just with sort of Gen Z coming through, the sort of millennial side, everyone's sort of creative, everyone's got their own ideas now.
I'm going to wholeheartedly hold my hand up now and say that I have a tool that can benchmark the cost and price for a deliverable, and I believe that should be a starting point. That's an industry standard, and I then believe that the agency, based on their capability, whether it be creative, whether it be project management-led, account management-led, research-led, it could be you want to load it up front with additional planning or resources. I think that's then for the agency to determine what is your unique selling point, your USP, what makes you different, and then how you can twist that from what I would see as the benchmark for deliverable-based pricing. And I think that's the real challenge, is how do you start at something that you can identify a price for something and then turn that into your advantage.
I think to Tracy's point, I think that's where you protect yourselves as agencies. When you go to a deliverable, you've got all those components that are broken down with an hours and time against it. Then you're going back to the client and saying, if you want to reduce my price, which of these components are you going to attack? Which ones are you going to take out? Because each one of these has a relevance to quality, what we're going to deliver to you, and that helps change the conversation then. The conversation then comes, well, I don't want that component. then the agency can come back and say, well, if we don't do that, this is the effect. It's always cause and the effect. And I think that's what we try to get to, and that hopefully you get that balance. But it comes down to what Rob was saying, I think, at the end of the day, is the trust between the agencies and the clients. And I think that's where Tracy's tool can help facilitate that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Thank you.